Your Excellencies, friends, colleagues. It is a great pleasure. It truly is a great pleasure to be in Bhutan, to be at the JSW Law School, to be with you on this really important topic. And thank you, Eric, for those the inspiring words, which I will try to sort of build on. I bring you greetings in particular from all of my colleagues at the Asia Foundation. I serve on the board. I have the great honor of serving on the board of the Asia Foundation, and we are mightily proud of the work that the foundation is being able to support here in Bhutan and including at the law school. And thank you for all you do, and congratulations for all you have done on behalf of all of our colleagues who are here with me. I'm going to use my few minutes to, in some ways, build directly from where Eric left us, and to take a more global view. I am originally from Pakistan. I have taken the scenic route to come to Bhutan, which is Pakistan via the United States, via the UK at Oxford, where I'm currently based, to back home here in South Asia. And I will try to weave those things together. In my few minutes, with your permission, Chair, I want to raise three questions. I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer them, but I think they're the type of questions that might help us in not only the next 3 days, but beyond those 3 days. The first of them is a question very dear to me, which is, what is the climate telling us? Not what we are telling each other about the climate. We talk a lot about the climate. Unfortunately, I do not think we listen enough to the climate. And I want to spend just a few minutes before I come to philanthropy to use my professorial cap to think about what is the climate telling us at this moment, on this day in January, at the start of the new year. What is the climate telling us? The second is something which I know the Dean has thought a lot about, and you have thought a lot about. Why think law? Why are we interested in law and climate change? Why are we talking about climate change in a law school? And I think we all know the answer to that, but it's a question that's worth asking out loud, because it helps us reinforce our passions. And the third is to why think philanthropy. Right? So that's the little sort of schema of my next few minutes. And as I do that, the proposition that I bring to you, I hope the screen is working well. We are doing through Zoom, but hope technology works. The proposition that I bring to you is that the onset of climate change fundamentally changes the nature of climate policy. That in fact something has changed. It's not just evolved over the time that I've been working on it and you've been working on it. Something in the last few years has fundamentally changed, and in the age of adaptation, law and philanthropy must play new roles. So the change is fundamental. I'll come to that. What is the change? The change is what I call the age of adaptation. Climate is no longer a future issue. I grew up thinking of climate as something that we needed to avoid. The goal was to stop climate change. That's still the goal. But we are now scientifically at a moment when climate change is inevitable. The challenge is just how wise or not wise as a species we will be, right? And that's the age of adaptation. And that puts a different responsibilities on countries like Bhutan or Pakistan or India, right? It's a very different, because that's where the impacts are. And that both law and philanthropy must play new and different roles in this age of adaptation. And so I'll be quick because time is short, but I want to start with the climate story. And this is a story you know, but I think it's a story that's worth repeating. Won't go into the details. We talk about climate policy. I have my colleagues from international institutions here. We've all heard about Paris that set goals. You know of two goals that were set. One was this mysterious, mythical 100 billion. Didn't come about, isn't going to come about. I'm not being cynical. At best, it tells you what is the magnitude of the effort that we need to make. At this point, it is clear that it will mostly come from the poorest people themselves. The floods will come to Pakistan. My house will be blown away. I will wait for the world, and the world has been very kind. But meanwhile, I will build my house again because I have no option. Right? So again, I'm not being cynical. I'm saying the level of the challenge is bigger. The science number is more harrowing. Remember these two numbers, 1.5? 1.5 is what a lot of vulnerable countries wanted. I served on the IPCC as a chair of the IPCC, the Scientific Commission. I hope I am wrong. I will give you anything in the world to be wrong on this. But at this point, there is absolutely no scientific path that serious scientists can see to 1.5. I'm not even sure we can make 2. Right? Now, again, I'm not trying to depress you at the beginning of your conference. I'm trying to set up the challenge. Right? That means climate impacts are inevitable. That means we owe it to ourselves and to our children, that wonderful young lad who sits there and spoke to us this morning, to take this challenge seriously. I want to take you back. Remember 2020? We all discovered Zoom. Remember how 2020 was the special year? While we thought it was special, let me remind you what else was happening in 2020. This was in your headlines, but we forget how quickly. January 2020 was the hottest January ever recorded. February 2020, second hottest February ever recorded. March, second hottest February ever recorded since we started recording temperatures. This is global temperature. April, second hottest ever. May, hottest ever. June, hottest June ever recorded. This is just 2020, right? By this time, you see what is coming. You could go, by this time, people even stopped talking about it. They wouldn't even tweet about it, right? November, hottest November ever. December was a little respite, 8th hottest ever. The point again, I'm just making a simple point, I'm going to make it again and again. The climate is not about to change, it has changed. Therefore, we need to change. From South Asia, to make it more current, last year, on April 29th, I tweeted this out. By my calculation, on April 29, 2022, 1 billion people, 1 billion people in our region, South Asia, were facing temperatures of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more. That is not right, not on the 29th of April. I've lived in 100, I know that, I'm from Lahore, I understand 100. I can live with 100. But not when it happens in April. Not when it happens to 1 billion people, right? That's the type of challenge. And again, I fear that I'm being scary, but I'm not trying to be. I hope you can see the colors on this. This is actual data for every month for which we have data of how the world's temperature has changed. The first circle is 1.5, the second is 2. This is not future data. I have now promised myself I will never put up future data, because that makes people think as if we have time. This is current and past data, and that stops at 2016. Now you might be thinking, that's fine, Professor, but I don't live on planet Earth, all of it. I live in Bhutan or I live wherever. So I took the same data, and for every place on Earth for which we actually have numbers, ever since we have actual data, what does the climate look like? Choose your place. Choose wherever you think you are interested in. And 24, 1935, 1939, 1945, that clock is ticking on that graph of what is happening to climate, right? I realize I'm sort of doing the climate talk here more than the philanthropy, but I'll come to it in just a minute, right? This is actual climate, actually changed, right? And that is what brings me to this thing that I call the age of adaptation, right? We're not going to make 1.5, unfortunately. Therefore, we have to prepare for what the world looks like when we don't make 1.5. I'm going to skip this slide, but essentially what it says is, this is IPCC work I've done. What does it mean to have a 0.5 degree change? What it means is that the likelihood of extreme heat doubles. What it means is the likelihood of drought increases 3 times, 300%, right? And that is what brings us to the age of adaptation. I'm going to only use 2 more slides and then come to the philanthropy part. And we usually don't talk enough about climate and nature. What happens in the age of adaptation? The most important change is going to happen in nature. And I've purposely chosen that picture. It is not a polar bear waiting to be saved. If you mess with nature, nature will retaliate. If we think we are not part of nature, nature will not think we are part of nature. Right? That's the thing. And in some ways, the picture to me is to be scared of is that. When that happens, for example, that's the dengue mosquito. Right? There's a reason why dengue is increasing. The dean the other day told me this very wise saying from a wise teacher, that when you are thirsty, should you be caring about the shape of the cup or the water in it? That's the moment we are in with climate change, right? And speaking of water, I only wanted to use this slide. I am from Pakistan. You've all heard about the floods. When I talk to audiences outside South Asia, you all know this. They don't get what a flood looks like. Right? Especially on the plains, that's what a flood looks like. That's what a flood looks like sometimes 5 months after the flood. Right? But what I wanted to show you, this is for the last 2010 floods that I did. I wanted to explain to my American audiences how large a flood in South Asia can be. Right? So I took the map of the covered area, that's the yellow squiggly, put it on a map of the US in scale to explain the size. The same flood put on a map of Japan. The same flood put on a map of Europe, from Denmark down to Spain. Right? Those people who live in nature have a different relationship to nature. It is home. It's not simply a place from where you get resources. It is a place that gives you life. Right? And I won't have time to go into this. This is work, and Dechen from UNEP is here very kindly supporting this. We've been doing in Pakistan to think of the river in our case as a living thing that needs to be respected in order for it to continue protecting us. A river that has sustained us for 5,000 years, will we be able to sustain it for another 50? Right? If water goes, water is the front line of climate change. It's not carbon, not anymore. Think about what happens when climate changes. Water rises, sea level rise. Water melts, glaciers. Water disappears, drought. Water falls from the sky like no one's business. Floods and extreme events, right? So the language of water is the language of climate, and if you're talking about water, you're immediately talking about food. I've taken too long, but allow me last 2 slides and I end. Law. How does law change, or what is law's responsibility in the age of adaptation? 3 things, I would argue. And I hope I have read the symbols right. I hope you will excuse the interested outsider if I have made mistakes. 3 challenges for law, I would say, in the age of climate change and the age of adaptation. The first is, climate change is about justice. Justice is a particular word. My name is Adil. In Arabic, it means the just. It comes from the word Adil, so it's one of 99 names of God in Islam, as the just. But justice is important. In my university, we sometimes wonder if we had schools of justice rather than schools of law, would they teach things differently? Something to think about, right? But I hope you will be a school of justice, right? And climate change, as Eric pointed out, is a justice question, right? Won't go into the details. Climate change is a cooperation question. And the role of law is to create the environment in which cooperation can happen. The role of law in climate is not about punishment. It's not about the cup, it's about the water, right? And the third, climate change is about promises kept. That's the loss and damage question, right? That's the 100 billion question. And that is the way I think we need to begin reformulating what we mean by climate and law. Very last slide, one more after this, philanthropy. Right. 3 lessons I would suggest about philanthropy from these 3 very wise Bhutanese colleagues. The 3 things that I would raise to you to take, and then Eric has somewhat alluded to them, about philanthropy and climate in this age. First, the word philanthropy comes from the Greek philo and anthropy, the love for humanity. Right? That's what the word philanthropy means. Love for mankind, love for humanity. In the age of climate change, love for humanity, Eric, I hope you won't mind this, is a very selfish act. Because I am part of humanity. Right? It is not a selfless act for some other person. It is for myself. Right? And that notion of philanthropy, of not only of giving back, but of having the responsibility to make my species better, is important. The second, philanthropy in environment is an ancient environmental practice. In your country, in mine, if you go back, where did water courses come from? Who managed the pond? Who created the forests? And in culture after culture, you see, these were philanthropic enterprises because they came out of that love for humanity. So in some ways, I think we in philanthropy also need to start thinking of philanthropy's role and going back to that practice. So if you think about country after country, I don't have the time to go through here, but I'm very happy to afterwards with people. A lot of the environmental services in society were philanthropically provided. Right? And that expands the notion of responsibility that I was talking about. And the third, philanthropy as a driver of policy, as a primer of pumps, as seed, as venture capitalist on policy, doing that which large institutions may not yet be ready to do, but taking that stage and saying, I'm going to put my treasure in trying this thing out so that the proof of concept can happen. So those are my things. I apologize for taking too long. Let me summarize. This is stuff that I had been very, very kindly sort of done on the request of the United Nations. Some of it is, not all of it. But 4 lessons from what I just said. First, we need to move from thinking about climate as mostly about energy to thinking about climate as nearly everything. It's the place we live in. It's not just the bulb we use for electricity. We need to think about moving from maximizing growth to maximizing happiness. Happiness clearly is something I've learned from Bhutan. Right? We need to move from thinking about nature as something to control to nature as something to respect. And we need to think about the world as being international, made up of many nations, each of them trying to do the best for themselves, to being global, being a planet that is connected, where what is good for me, where what is bad for someone else cannot possibly be good for me. Thank you once again for giving me the time here. Thank you once again for doing this wonderful thing that you're doing.